happy to have our speakers and also audience here for the Robots for Good workshop. And several of us who are here were here also last year, and I think we're kind of inspired by some of the things we saw to start thinking a little bit more deeply and questioning this notion of what does it mean for robots to be designed to be for good, so for some kind of social benefit. And what we want to do today is delve into that even more, a little bit more deeply with our speakers here and with the audience. So and the way that we're going to go about the workshop is initially have 7 talks where you're going to get different perspectives from different disciplines about how our speakers think about what the goodness of robots could be and how they explore that in their work. And then we're going to have a little break, and then we're going to have a panel where you can also talk to the speakers, and an interactive component where we want to actually hear from the audience a little bit more of what you think are some of the important questions relating to robots for good. What are things that you think are interesting potential problems to work on? What do you think are ethical challenges? And then we're going to talk a little bit about those together. So first, okay, you can use that. No, I got it. Just learning a new system as always. So I'm Selma Šabanović. We're going to do just a quick organizer introduction. I'm a professor at Indiana University, Bloomington, and I work on human-robot interaction and social robotics research with different populations, older adults, children, and in different contexts, in healthcare, in education, and often also in cross-cultural work in different countries like Japan, US, and sometimes different countries in Europe. And I'm talking about Vicky.
Yeah, thank you, Selma, and thank you for everybody to be here today with us. My name is Vicky Charisi. I am a research affiliate at the UCL Institute of Education. My main focus is robots for children and AI in education. I used to work at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission for the last 6 years, and I focus on policy recommendations and how we translate science to policy. Probably we can give the floor to Shelly, who is here online.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Shelly Levy-Tzedek, and I study social robots for rehabilitation. In my lab, we employ the participatory design approach where we ask the main stakeholders what they need, and so we design robotic platforms per group, because you cannot look at rehabilitation as a single field. There are really different needs by different stakeholders, and we even find that within a certain population, let's say Parkinson's, you can find different views of the different stakeholders, be they patients, family members, and clinicians. And the mic goes back to you guys.
Yep. We're getting there.
All right. So I will say in the meantime, while you're getting there, that one of the things that I'm really interested about is the ethical considerations in using robots, especially for vulnerable populations. And I see we're back. So take it from here.
And another one of the organizers who couldn't be here is Professor Maya Matarich from the University of Southern California. And she's been studying social robots and actually came up with the term socially assistive robots about 20 years ago. So definitely a pioneer in the area. And then we also have Lee.
Hi, I'm Lee. I'm a PhD candidate at Indiana University. I work with Selma, and I primarily focus on children's rights to privacy with social robots, both primarily in the home, but also in hospitals and schools. And I'm going to be keeping everyone on time today, so I promise I'm nice, but I will tell you to stop speaking when it's time to stop speaking.
I'm glad she's doing it rather than me. So we just wanted to get started with just a quick recap of the notion of assistive robots. How many of you have already heard of are you familiar with assistive robots, the term? Yeah? How many of you work on assistive robotics? Quite a few. How about a socially assistive robot? of the same field. So I think people are used to the notion of robots helping people in different ways. Assistive robots are kind of either can help in physical ways, mentally, or sometimes they can help in terms of people's social experiences as well. One of the things that we think socially assistive robots typically help through social interaction. One of the things we think is different about robots rather than some of the other technologies we use for these things, like our mobile phones, we have all kinds of apps, or even, potentially agents that are on the screen that we can talk to and interact with in nonverbal ways, like robots, is that robots have physical co-presence with people. And that's been shown. That, of course, can have kind of concerns in the sense that they can actually touch you, but they also have potentially different psychological effects, because having a co-embodied, co-present actor has been shown to have different kinds of social and psychological effects on people. So those are some of the things we want to consider today as we go along.
So last year we were here with Selma and some other people, and we were really inspired by the people that were here bringing their robots in this event, the United Nations AI for Good Global Summit. And we observed that some people, all of these people are claiming that their robots are robots for good, but for us it was not very clear what exactly good means. So that's why at some point after this event last year, we thought, the people that are there, to write a paper which was published last year at the Science Robotics journal, this paper in order to trigger people that work in robotics, in social robotics, but in general in robotics, to reflect on themselves, on how exactly we define good. And that's why, so we published this paper, and then the ITU invited us to run this workshop and probably to start creating a community in order to all of us together try to define what good means for the community of robotics and social assistive robots. We are aware that sometimes good might be conflicting for different populations, so it's not straightforward to define. And we really hope that after this workshop and after the discussions, we will have some directions, and probably we can get back to you with more insights after this workshop. I think Shelly will share with us the goals of the workshop.
Exactly. So following up directly on what Vicky was saying, we realized that we don't have all the answers, and rather we want to collect it from a very wide variety of people. And so it was important for us in this workshop to get together diverse perspectives from including but not limited to industry, academia, general public, policymakers, NGOs, and so forth. And in that workshop, our goal is to discuss the ethical considerations deploying assistive robots. Like Selma was saying, there are potential benefits, but we can also see the potential risks, and we want to discuss them together and think of how we might minimize the risks while maximizing the benefits. And ultimately, not in this workshop, but down the line, we're hoping to create standardization for responsibly deploying and developing and deploying assistive robots. So these are our goals for today, to think together of how we can take this list of 10 questions and modify it, add to it, maybe take some things out, and understand how can we as a society strive for responsibly deployed robots.
Thank you, Shelly. So one of the things that we wanted to just let you know is that we are audio recording the workshop, not video, right? Or are we video recording?
No.
Even if it's video, we can't see the audience, so people in the audience are not.
Well, we can't see you apparently. So, yeah, we're audio recording because one of the things we're doing after this is we're going to write a summary and white paper that comes out of this. So we just want to keep track of some of the conversations so we can take that into account. And we're actually also happy to provide you with that too. So I'll grab a piece of paper so you can write us your name if you're curious about that once you leave here. But with that, I think we can get started. So first, as I mentioned, we're going to have a series of talks from people who work on different areas of assistive robotics. And we're going to start with David Crandall, who works in computer vision. He's going to kind of start us off on one of the basic capabilities, let's say, of many of our robots.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation to come here today. So, speak here today. So I'm not a roboticist, so I thought I would talk a little more broadly about AI for good in the AI community. And as I read through this paper, which I really liked and reflected on the questions that were being asked, I thought, if I'm actually honest with myself, and if we're honest with ourselves, a lot of the AI for good projects that are purportedly for good have a specific definition of good. How did we come up with our definition of good? It's because it sounded good to reviewers or funding agencies or to investors. And that means ultimately, who is actually it good for? It's good for me. It's not necessarily good for anybody else. And I mean this not in really a cynical way, because I think it's important for us to think about like what actually motivates AI researchers and practitioners to be doing the work that they're doing. And so for this, I wanted to maybe take a step back and talk a little bit about my community, the computer vision community. So the computer vision is about understanding the visual world, understanding what's in images and videos, very important for robotics and a core part of the AI community. And this used to be like a sleepy little area of computer science. And yet now, in just the last few years, it's regularly mentioned in the New York Times, for example. And you can see this growing prominence in other ways as well. If you look at the top most impactful journal publication venues in all of science, not computer science, not AI, but in all of science, our conference, CVPR, Computer Vision and Pattern Recognition Conference, is tied for the journal Science itself. It's ranked number 4. And because of that, the interest in this community in terms of papers submitted to CVPR has been growing very quickly. And I'm the program chair for CVPR this year, so I know that we got a 30% increase in papers even from last year. And of these 12,000 papers, only about 23% of them are accepted as posters, and less than 1% are accepted as talks. So there is this huge influx of interest. And so my student, Sam Gori, was interested in how all of this interest and this competition is changing the community. And so he did this kind of interesting study where he looked at the last like 25 years of computer vision research papers to see how they changed. And I'll give you a couple of highlights. For example, people these days usually have a name for their system. So their papers are called things like GFPO, CXtract, Notify Twins.
Closet is my favorite.
There's the rise of the teaser image. So this is a big image you put right below your name that grabs people's attention. There's the rise of the results table. So if you want your paper to be accepted these days, you need on the last page usually a massive table like this, where each row has all the competing algorithms that are out there. Yours is at the very bottom. All the results are in bold, and they better be better than everybody else.
Of course.
If you want it to get accepted. And so the AI research paper today has maybe these 3 components. It has this branding yourself with a new name. It has the teaser image to grab attention. It has the quantitative comparisons to competitors showing improvement. It reminds me not so much of a research paper in some cases anymore, but more like something you would see on like late night TV, like Bounty brand hotels. In particular, it works 20% better than the leading brand. And so in the way that this is going, we've been interested in like, well, how do computer vision researchers feel about this like change and the way that papers in this sort of strive to get more attention, to get your paper accepted and so on. So a colleague of mine, Professor Norman Su, who's an ethnographer, and I did this joint project a couple of years ago where we interviewed people in the computer vision community to see what kind of like emotions they were feeling throughout all the changes in this community. And you can read our paper for more details. We tried to involve as many people as possible, both in academia and industry at different stages of their career and so on. And I'll just show some of the findings here that I think are kind of interesting. So we found this wide range of emotions that people in the community are feeling. Some very positive, some being excited about like all the progress in deep learning specifically. They talked about how deep learning might have rescued computer vision over the last 10 years and how exciting it is that it's this tool that now everybody can use, or many people can use. And a lot of excitement about all the growth, the fact that computer vision is now something that people are talking about, the fact that there's this surprising switch in power dynamics, whereas students used to have to really compete to get internships, now companies have to compete to get the students to work for them. The wealth and all this sort of money flying around. And yet at the same time, there are a lot of negative feelings. So this shift to deep learning, a lot of people expressed frustration over that they got in this field wanting to study fundamental questions about perception and cognition and vision and learning, and now they feel like they are black box engineers. They feel like there's this hyper focus on benchmarks, getting slightly better accuracy at great computational cost. They talked about selective amnesia, where papers that are just a few years old are considered like ancient. People don't even bother reading them anymore. There's too many papers being published this year to worry about those. And there's a lot of people, actually a surprising amount of people, who talked about feeling isolation, feeling about how hard it is to make a mark in this community, how ethics and other kinds of maybe off the mainstream right now topics in computer vision are being ignored. The fact that like educators, for example, are having a harder time competing, just this general feeling of like marginalization, being alone. And what was surprising to me is that this was true even in the very top institutes in the field, people feeling like they really couldn't make their mark. And then finally, there were these feelings about deep concern about where the technology is headed. This one quote I love, someone said, "I can no longer be a simple happy nerd, an ostrich researcher hiding my head in the sand and blame others for the misuse of technology, because I'm helping to develop it." Growing uncertainty about the ramification, tired about research that has harmful effects, and so on. And then there was a lot of concern about all of the money that's pouring in to AI right now. Much of it has, good impacts, but also it means that a lot of people feel like they're having to work on problems they don't really want to work on just in order to chase the funding. And so some of the takeaways, I think, of these two papers and how they relate to the people we're talking about is, the growth of AI and computer vision in particular has had this really large emotional impact on the community of people who do it. Excitement, but also marginalization and frustration. And there's concern about ethical and societal consequences. And I think there's a real appetite for people to do good, but the incentive structure is not there. The incentive structure is about people trying to make their mark in the community, to play the games using these quantitative metrics of success in order to show that their technique is better than everybody else's and get their paper accepted into this community. My student Sam has written on several papers on this, and one of the ideas that I think is really interesting is there's work by Haraway, for example, that talks about how scientists often see ourselves as objective. We see ourselves as measuring the objective world, and yet we see the world colored through various biases that we have. We decide which research questions to pursue. We build the instruments that we use to make measurements. We interpret those results and so on. And so by necessity, we are injecting subjectivity into this process. This is something that Haraway calls a God trick, pretending like that we are objective when we aren't. And treating things as objective that are not objective can lead us astray. It can reinforce majority viewpoints and so on. And so in the case of AI and computer vision, the kinds of God tricks I see are things like assuming that the data sets that we have are unbiased, perfect measures of the world, or assuming that our quantitative metrics, like all those metrics in the table, are the right way, the objective way of measuring how good an approach is. And for that matter, assuming something is for good just because I say it's for good and I'm a scientist. And so I really like this paper that you folks have written. I think it brings up really good questions. My only maybe addition to that is I think in order to get people to think more about doing AI for good in really the right way, the way that's actually beneficial to everyone, I think we have to think about what the incentives are right now in science and industry around AI. Maybe we need to de-emphasize this focus on quantitative metrics and emphasize more holistic, maybe qualitative kind of evaluations. Or maybe we have to say, okay, let's just play this game. Let's quantify goodness so it can be a metric of comparison and success. But in general, we need to incentivize working on AI for actual good, both in academia and industry. And with that, I'll say thank you.
So we'll be collecting questions for the end, and you're going to have a chance after the break also to interact more and ask questions of the presenters. So like write them down. But now after David's really thought-provoking look at computer vision, thank you. Friederike Esel from the University of Bielefeld is going to tell us a little bit about a psychological perspective on AI.
Yeah, so I'm happy to do exactly that. Thank you, Selma. Thanks everyone for having me. So indeed, what do psychologists do? As a psychologist, I'm interested in understanding the fundamental principles that guide human cognition, affect, and their behavior, and try to understand and explore that usually in a laboratory setting. So that's where you find people like me. And we want to try to establish cause and effect relationships between very specific variables. And that is why we conduct empirical experiments with real people, but also with robots, to understand the underpinnings of human-human, but also human-robot interactions, with the goal to explore and test theoretical assumptions that we in the lab want to put to a test. So this is a bit of a bright, dry perspective, because I think it somehow clashes with the actual reality of having the meta perspective of robots for good. But because the search for causality comes with limitations. We have limited external validity when we think of the artificial reality in the lab, and then the reality out there. And when I think of robots for good, I immediately think of robots for all. But then if we look around, except for maybe today when we look at the demos downstairs, where are the robots? We think of deploying them out there in schools, in homes, in the industries, but they are not as ubiquitous yet as we normally claim in our papers or as we can observe here out there. So in order to actually assess how good robots or how bad they are for all people, I think we have to move beyond the walls of the lab and go out there in the wild, as Selma has already said years and years ago. And we need to investigate people dealing with robots, interacting with robots on a long-term basis and in natural contexts outside of the academic laboratory. And before we do so, however, to prepare for such a scenario where people actually interact with the robots, we need to kind of start a discourse between multiple disciplines, including ethics, philosophy, design, and social sciences. And we have to kind of really put in place an integrated research framework that enables us to shed light on the social, legal, ethical principles that should guide us. But we should do that a priori when we actually start the research project, and not post hoc when the robot is already dusting over there in the corner. Because I heard such stories where robots have been deployed, but then they're sitting in the elderly care center unused in the corner. But let's not go into that direction. What we also need is more longitudinal research, as I pointed out already, and research that looks at the cross-cultural perspective. And then again, as researchers, we have to be mindful of the biases that we bring into the research situation and have to take that into account in order to cater more to diversity. In light of this need for more research in these realms, I think the paper by Selma Šabanović and colleagues is really helpful and serves as a fruitful guiding light, basically, for future research to make it better in quality and improve the research that is to come, to help us broaden the scope of the research that we are, that we have to do. In that sense, thank you very much for that that important addition to the literature. But I have to bring in some sort of disillusionment as well, because besides these empirical realities that we sketch in the laboratory setting, I think we have to actually also take into account the wide range misperceptions that people actually have about robots and how robots work, what they can do and what they cannot do. And these might be misperceptions that people in the lobby or here might share as well. And there are people worrying about losing their jobs to AI technology. And there are people who think the robocalypse is coming, or some sci-fi writers who have coined that, well, indeed, robots should actually be ruling the world already. But seriously, are we there yet? I don't see that. What I see, however, in my own data, for instance, is that indeed biased representations of people about what robots can and cannot do, about how advanced they actually are, may impact the user expectations that people have, may impact their affect, their attitudes, and also might lead to the fact that they might have indeed ambivalent attitudes towards such technologies. And that's actually a term that also resonated with David's presentation. He was giving good examples for that, but I want to give one as well. I love that slide because it shows indeed how people think about autonomous robots. And this is just people from Germany, but they brought up positive and negative resonances towards autonomous robots. And you can see it's not univocally positive. So they don't just love the robots, but they have clear reservations, for instance, in terms of privacy and security aspects that they worry about. So they manifest ambivalence. And ambivalence in psychological terms means the coexistence of positive and negative evaluations at the very same time. So we have these conflicting feelings about these robots or AI technologies out there. And for me, it's very important to make the point that indeed we have to acknowledge that there are these people on the red side who really feel like, oh no, I don't want to have these technologies in my home as assistive robots or elsewhere. And yeah, we have to be mindful of that. And also the way we measure might actually mask the ambivalence that we see here. Because if you measure it in a way that just sounds like, oh, it's mildly neutral or positive, we might overlook that indeed this is ambivalence. So for me, I think it's important to acknowledge user attitudes in all the scope that is there. So not just the good and the bad, but we have to really be mindful of this so we can counteract these misperceptions and expectancy biases and do something against the worries that are also widely shared by people. So what could we actually do to change these imaginaries and to correct the imaginaries that people might have to arrive at a more realistic perception of what robots are and what they can do or cannot do? We should maybe integrate stakeholders' perspectives. So take into account many people who have to deal with robots and integrate them in the very process of developing robots at very early on. And getting them involved, and this is what our research from the EU-funded project Perseo shows, is that when you give them the chance to get involved, and when you give them the chance to actually customize the robot, so adapt the robots to their needs and preferences, that would actually help to increase their positive attitude and the trust towards the robot. And also, if we go that far as to say like, oh, people have the feeling of control and knowledge about their robot. This even helps to increase a sense of, we call it psychological ownership. So users would think, wow, this object in the corner here is actually mine, you know, because I customize it. So involvement in adaptations could be two ways of actually changing misperceptions about robots. Or good. Another way of changing imaginaries would be to shift perspectives from users to robots themselves. And it might be helpful to consider the notion of transparency of robot behavior. And even though this hasn't been published yet, I want to make the point here that indeed it's important to create robots that are explainable, legible, and predictable. But as a psychologist, I have to say, it's important to actually have a theoretically grounded concept of what transparency would mean, and then to have a clear definition and an adequate measurement of this. And this is again where this lab nerd is coming in again, trying at the nitty-gritty details of item formulation to get to the core of transparency here. But when we understand robot behavior better, and we have a sense of transparency here, then we can also clean up the misperceptions in the mind, because we can help users to get a more realistic picture of what robots actually can or cannot do. So wrapping up, I think what can we take home from these nearly 10 minutes talking here is that maybe a multidisciplinary, holistic perspective may facilitate that robots are indeed deemed good by many people in many societies around the globe. But I also find it important to acknowledge that not everyone might agree. So not everybody might like robots. And to come to conclusions of whatever kind, positive or negative, we need research, basic research and applied research. And if we join forces in that effort to kind of get to that better understanding, I think we can ultimately come to a point where we can say, like, okay, we try to understand what brings good to, most people, if not all. With that said, thanks very much.
Thank you, Friederike. And then next, we are going to have Ginevra Castellano from University of Uppsala.
Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about social robots for perinatal depression screening and what is good and who benefits from it. First of all, what is perinatal depression? Perinatal depression is a disorder that affects 10 to 20% of women during pregnancy or after childbirth. And the clinical diagnosis is required to receive treatment. However, access to skilled personnel can vary, and up to 69% of cases go undetected. So if we look at the maternal care and perinatal depression, in Sweden, 70% of mothers in a study were offered perinatal depression screening 6 to 8 weeks after birth. So that means that after birth, not all mothers receive screening for perinatal depression, and the focus is rather on the child's health. On the other hand, if we look at what happens during pregnancy, future mothers meet a midwife 6 to 10 times, but there's no perinatal depression screening at all in this period. So what is good here? So good is that mothers are made aware of perinatal depression, are offered perinatal depression screening in both pregnancy and after childbirth, are screened and diagnosed without delay. And in general, good is that more perinatal depression cases are detected. So in a project funded by Uppsala University Center for Women's Mental Health during the lifespan, we are investigating whether socially assistive robots can be used for screening perinatal depression. So we're asking questions about whether they could be used to support clinicians and how, and also whether they could be useful in other roles surrounding perinatal depression. And this is in alignment with the third UN Sustainable Development Goal on good health and well-being, which is about ensuring healthy lives and promoting well-being for all and at all ages. So if I now have to talk about this work in light of Šabanović and colleagues' paper, Robots for Good, 10 defining questions. So I chose 4 questions here that relate to this work, and I will use to guide my presentation of this work. So first of all, who are socially assistive robots in perinatal depression good for? Who are they not good for, and in what ways?
What are the potential negative consequences? And what structures need to be put in place to guard against potential negative consequences, and by whom? So in these projects, we are investigating the Furhat robot made by Furhat Robotics as a socially assistive robot for perinatal discretion screening. So a robot that would administer questionnaires for screening of perinatal depression. It is an interdisciplinary project that involves conversations from experts from different areas, and it is a project in collaboration with sociologists of law. So we have had interdisciplinary conversations between sociology of law, human-robot interaction, perinatal depression, and the gender studies experts. So we have conducted interview studies to gather different stakeholders' perspectives on the possible use of a Furhat robot in the screening of perinatal depression. So we have interviewed psychiatrists, perinatal depression experts, and gender scholars, and mothers with previous perinatal depression experience. And what we have done before the interviews, so we have shown these stakeholders vignettes where they could read what a robot's supporting screening of perinatal depression would look like, and they will also show fictional videos or videos of fictional interaction between a patient and the robot playing the role of social depression screening. But And I now provide a summary of the main takeaway messages from these interviews. And I will discuss them in light of the EU requirements for trustworthy AI, as long as in light of some of the questions from Šabanović and colleagues' paper that we have seen before. So if we start with psychiatrists, perinatal depression experts, and gender scholars, and we look at the question of who and how socially assistive robots could be used. Psychiatrists and perinatal depression experts think that social robots would be used when there are unmet needs for trained clinicians or to save time with screening. At the same time, they pointed to the importance of robots to assist and not replace humans, as in healthcare personnel. And this is in alignment with the trustworthy AI requirements of human agency and oversight and accountability. On the other hand, gender scholars reflected on the possible use of socially assistive robots in less stigmatized contexts, for example, in structures that can support mothers beyond the medical institutions. When we look at the negative consequences, psychiatrists pointed to the concern about possible loss of jobs, and this aligns with the trustworthy AI requirements of societal and environmental well-being, specifically society and democracy. When we look at mothers with the previous perinatal depression and focus on who and how socially assistive robots could be good. So first of all, mothers expressed needs concern the need for more information about perinatal depression during and after delivery, and the need for early aid to take place. Other views included the fact that mothers thought that they might prefer to speak with a robot rather than a human, because this might make them not feel judged by another human being. They also thought that they would prefer to speak with a robot administering a questionnaire for screening rather than using a self-administered questionnaire on paper, as this would aid self-reflection. They also commented about the importance for robots to be a complement rather than a replacement for healthcare professionals. And this again aligns with the trustworthy AI requirement of societal and environmental well-being, social impact, and with the requirements of human agency and the oversight. Mothers also commented about the importance of transparency on what data is stored and shared and how. This aligns with the requirements of transparency and the requirements of privacy and data governance. And when it comes to possible negative consequences, some mothers had a view of concern about feeling abandoned by the healthcare system. And this is connected with the requirements of social impact. But I'd like to point out here, we have very mixed opinions in mothers with perinatal depression. And I go back to what Federica talked about, this ambivalence, very many different opinions. So mothers really positive about trying out robot as a tool, and others really quite skeptical. Right now, we're conducting a study with mothers with recent perinatal depression and a real robot, so a real interaction. So we will see what is the outcome of that. But to conclude, we have seen from interviews from many different stakeholders that there are both opportunities and challenges with utilizing social robots in perinatal depression screening. So we need policy and need legal frameworks to ask a number of different questions, starting with are there any goods in conflict? We mentioned this earlier, and we could see from the interview with stakeholders that there may be good in conflicts between patients, clinicians, the healthcare system itself. And we need frameworks to operationalize ethical guidelines of trustworthy AI, so to make sure that we find ways to implement them in practice. And we need regulatory sandboxes to test in a safe environment. And this requires the sort of interdisciplinary discussion with societal stakeholders that we have been trying to do in this work. And finally, we need to ask the questions of how can we ethically integrate robots in perinatal depression screening, asking important questions of, do we need robots at all? And if so, how can we take advantage of robots while at the same time providing more support to caregivers instead of replacing or reducing the number of humans? And that is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ginevra. And Ginevra will be followed by Alessandra Sciutti from ITU in Genoa. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. So thank you for having me here. Actually, I found it particularly interesting to try and see how the questions that were posed by the paper could apply to the way I'm using robots, which is really as a pure tool, as a sort of tool to study humans. So this is connected to a rather old idea, so to have a synthetic approach to understand humans. So I try to build a complex system to understand a much more complex system, which is the human, which recently has become clear could be particularly useful in the domain of understanding our ability to interact and assist each other. So what is good for this kind of approach? Why robot? Well, we believe this could have important outcomes for science at large on understanding humans and human cognition. And in turn, our better understanding of humans could bring in also a better robot that can actually help knowing us better. And why robots? Well, because they represent controllable agent. So we can control what our robots do, what our robots perceive, and how it behaves. And it is a contingent agent, so it can sense and react in real time, and it shares our own space, which means that this allows us the unique opportunity of studying interaction as it unfolds. And we believe that it could be good for roboticists, of course, but also for all other domains that are interested in understanding humans, because we can use it as stimulus in all settings that usually psychology and neuroscience has. And have an additional tool, an additional weapon, if you want, to understand this complex task. And at the same time, we can gather insights that drive our way of developing AI systems and AI models that help the robots adapt to us. So far, so good. But what is the dark side of our understanding? Well, even if this can seem more basic kind of research, the fact of choosing a robot as a tool to study humans can bring in some limitations, some problems. The first one is a sort of, maybe a God trick exercise before, or a polarization. Because if we choose a tool of sort to investigate something, then of course we will shape, or we will give different priorities to what we look at, because we will tackle first the things that can be easily tackled with our system. And that, I suspect, is the reason why in the past, robotics and cognitive robotics focused more on other aspects like movement, behavior, and less on affective components of cognition, exactly because it is so hard to study with robots. Then there is a big issue, for me in particular, related to similarity or simulation. So we as humans are designed to interact with other humans, which means that we, in our brain, we have areas that are really responsive to the way another human moves. So there is the paradigmatic example of the mirror neurons, which are activated when we are doing something or when someone else is doing something and we are observing him. This means that we are particularly facilitated and moved, in some sense, by the movement of other people. If we understand well the rules and principles by which our brain is triggered, then we can imagine of implementing on the robot the same signature properties. And we did it. We did it in a way that allowed the robot to move, for instance, expressing different attitudes like aggressivity or kindness, or revealing carefulness with its movement alone, so through nonverbal communication. And we found out that it's not easy, but if you pick the right way to do it, then you can evoke in the brain of the human observer a very similar activation in those social areas as the one that you observe when the human is observing another human. And this has also behavioral consequences, which are contagion. So it happens with me on a street. So if you're walking with me and I start moving faster, you move faster. It happens with a robot, if the robot moves according to biological motion. And there is also carefulness, automatic imitation. There is even, let's say, style automatic imitation. We have seen that if you're moving aggressively, and if a robot is moving aggressively, you will move more aggressively. So this can be seen as a negative aspect because it's a sort of implicit, unconscious kind of influence that the robot can bring to a partner. On the other hand, on this, I think we have to open a discussion because I do believe that these are really the building blocks of the facility, the easiness with which we collaborate with each other. We don't have to put any conscious effort in coordinating our movements in a collaboration task with a fellow human. And if we properly use the knowledge of this mechanism to build our robots, and this doesn't work only for humanoids, it works also for non-humanoid robots, well, then we can facilitate incredibly the interaction with these robots when they have to collaborate with us. So my reflection here is that probably we shouldn't get rid of this facilitation, of this simulation, but we should use other dimensions to make it clear that this is a robot. And this is the direction we are trying to follow in making the robot explicitly, clearly robotic, but at the same time, leveraging on the rules of nonverbal behavior that could facilitate the approach of a person collaborating with it. The last risk I want to come out with is the risk of language. So I find myself multiple times describing the research like, oh yes, I'm trying to study mutual understanding between humans and robots, or I want to build robots that can predict the intention. And I mean it, I really do mean it. But what I mean with these words is that maybe my robot will be able to guess your next object, or the next object you'll pick, or maybe that it will understand or have a guess about my internal state in a very specific context. But when I'm telling that, words like intention, words like understanding, they have a semantic that is so much richer than the one I'm using. And it's not a given that those who are listening to me use the same limited representation that I have in my mind. And so I think a lot of efforts spends on us researchers first, and then of course on communication channels, to really be mindful about our words. So there were interesting discussion and interesting papers discussing about also how rhetoric can play an important role in shaping the impact that our research has on large society. Well, how to deal with these risks? I'm finished. Yes, well, and that's I follow what the previous speaker suggested. So the idea of a multidisciplinary discourse, possibly not only done in the lab, but across industries and society, is an important way to go, to have a clearer view. Also because this brings to sort of self-correction. Again, if I use words that do not apply in other fields, this will pop out. This is something we are trying to do with the technical committee of IEEE in cognitive robotics, with a focus on cognitive robotics, and trying to involve society, involve industries to talk with us, and also other disciplines beyond engineering to discuss these topics. But this could be brought much, much more at large. And I think that papers like yours are really the way to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. And I think you're getting a very kind of broad view of all the different kinds of applications and different ways people use robots in society, which is also interesting to consider. Next, we'll have Rodolphe Hasselwander from Blue Frog Robotics. And do you have an assistant?
Yeah.
Yes, you do.
Sorry.
Oh,
Hello, I'm Rodolphe Hasselwander. I'm the founder of Blue Frog Robotics, and we embody AI to serve humans. So who we are major players in social robotics in Europe, because we have already deployed more than 2,000 robots, mainly in Europe, through specific verticals with strong social impact, because we address children with autism, education, inclusion of sick children, and elder care. So our mission is to transform human interaction with technology to create a more inclusive and empathic society. And we think,
Hello there.
we develop robots. So for that, we have developed Buddy. Buddy is the perfect incarnation of AI and robotics. We have integrated a lot of AI, like generative AI, AI for vision, because you have to detect people around him, where is it, the environment. You have to discuss with people. He must be proactive, can detect and recognize people. So many things to create a real companion, able to interact autonomously with people. We have also some accessories, it's interesting. And the most important thing, it's an affordable robot. I think one of the first really affordable robots for people. And our vision is tomorrow, everyone will live with robots. Like today, everyone live with smartphones. So we have to sell this kind of robot at the same price than an iPhone. So I will detail different use cases for robots for good. So the first one is provide telepresence robots to help children with long-term illness attend school remotely. So when they have to stay for a long period in hospital and they have to pursue their study. So there is not many AI in this use case, but it's a robot for good. We provide a tablet to children in his hospital room, and he will be able to control his robot at his place in the classroom like a real avatar. So he can see through the camera of the robot, he can talk to the other classmate or to the teacher, he can share his work with the teachers. So it's maybe like he was there. So it's very important for social link with all the class. And it's also possible to use this robot to play outside of the school, but also to visit museum and to use the robot in the home to take the link, to keep the link with the family. Just a short video.
Depuis sa chambre d'hôpital, Gabin, 6 ans, peut piloter le robot lui-même et se déplacer à distance dans sa maison. Il peut aussi écrire des messages pour que le robot les lise.
Bonjour Anne-6.
Bref, avoir la sensation quelques instants d'être chez lui, près de sa famille. Depuis sa chambre d'hôpital, Gabin, 6 ans.
Short, but it show you how it works. So we ask the question, is it a real robot for good or not? And so we think for sick children, it's very important for them to continue their learning. It's really important for social inclusion and also for their autonomy and engagement. For the family, it's reduces the stress and anxiety, and it's a real educational support. And for the classroom, it's really important for awareness and solidarity and to motivate the dynamics of the classroom. And there is also economic impact. Nobody talked about that, but it could be interesting also. Not for me, but for the society. For me also, yeah. And concerning the risk and biases, so we faced some technical problem at the beginning, and it was very difficult for the child because they are accustomed to the robots, and when they can't use it, it's very hard for them. And for the classmates, sometimes when there is a problem, so they don't see their mates, they think it could have a serious problem in health condition. So, and the other risk is the dependency of technology, the same thing for all the use cases. And we work with, maybe I don't know, yes. So we work with teachers, with families, and with French Ministry of Education, because we were the winner of a call of tender and we deployed thousands of robots in France. And we work hard to have all the feedback from all these stakeholders. And we have also some clinical studies made by hospitals in France. We worked on the impact of using body in the recovery of children. So the second thing is for children with autism, and to provide them a robot or a solution to help them to improve their social and communication skills. So this is some picture of the robot in different classrooms, but thanks to Buddy, Buddy can explain them different rituals. You can create interactive scenario and stories. We have some games, a gesture game for movement and mobility. We have different kind of also mediation possibility, because thanks to the application I showed you just before with the tablet, it's also a good way to interact with children when they are in crisis, because it's easier for them to interact with the robot than humans sometimes. And we have also application for education, but they can be used for children with autism, because sometimes it's very interesting for them to control a robot and see very quickly what is the reaction of the robot they just programmed. So just a short video.
Is hanging in the... Ouais. On accès au menu. C'est bien. Là, là.
C'est bien, Mathieu. Bravo.
Ouais. Non.
Je pense qu'il faudrait, à certains moments, quand on demande à la tête du robot de se baisser, qu'elle puisse, au bout d'un laps de temps, se remettre droite seule, parce que sinon, il faut refaire toutes les manipulations.
So it's, you know why you work hard when you see that. It's very interesting for them because thanks to the body can enhance their social interaction skills. It's also an emotional support for the families. It's also a support for home education and to at their place of family and not educators, very important for them. I will try to go past that. So there is also a good point after. And the risks are always the same: technical failures and dependency of technology. And sometimes social isolation, because we see that they have a good interaction with robots, but the main point is how to go to the social interaction with human and not only with robots. So first step, but not we have to go more further. So we work also with teachers, families, children, with professional therapists, with very interesting feedback from all these stakeholders. We have also some clinical studies made by Vicky Charisi Association about the impact of using body in social skills. Yes. And we have big partners like Beatrice. You know, Beatrice was the leader in the generic medicines. And the last thing is for seniors. It's why I created the company, to create a companion for elderly. And the idea is to provide, to have a real companion. The first thing is that, because it's for fighting isolation, and mainly all these people are alone for a very long period. So thanks to the robot like Buddy, they can talk to him, they can interact, it's like a companion, and they are not alone. It's very the key point. But we can also use the robot to do teleconsultation with doctors, also to have health monitoring or doubt removal with the telepresence capabilities of the robot. So you can check if your grandmother don't answer your phone call. You can use the tablet from everywhere in the world to check if everything is okay or not. So, few seconds after this.
Are you okay, Claude? Your heart rate is high and much higher than your past report. You should get some rest.
Nice.
I agree, buddy.
So we can receive some alerts if there is a problem. And as I said,
hey, Mark, what a nice surprise.
Hey, Dad, are you all right? I just got a message from Buddy that says you need to rest because your heart rate is too high.
Well, I overdid it today, son. Buddy's telling me to get some rest, and I'm going to do it. He's going to play some nice music for me.
Okay, good. I'm glad.
So you understood that this is very important for them to have a companion with them because they are alone. It's also very interesting for cognitive stimulation for the family, and this is one of the key points. It's really peace of mind, because when you have a grandmother or a mother in the lack of autonomy, it's very hard to live. It's me.
Yeah.
And just to finish, ethics is very important for us. I have created a department at Bloomington Robotics in charge of ethics. We have already written a white paper on ethics of social robotics, and I would be happy if you want to contribute. I can share the link after. And one of the biggest, and I will finish with that, the biggest question is it bad? Is it good or bad to stimulate emotion in a robot to provide companionship to senior?
Wow.
And we but it's a real question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rodolphe and Buddy. Maybe some others of us could also use a companion, you know? So next is Randy Gomez from Honda Research Institute.
Okay, good afternoon. So I must admit that my presentation does not really have the topics of the workshop written. So I think that's the downside of uploading your slides right from the very beginning, because you can't really add while you're listening to the speakers. But yeah, okay, I'll try as much as possible to talk about this AI for good, robots for good. Okay, so I'll talk briefly about our company. HRI. So it's called Honda Research Institute. So it's different from Honda Motors. It's separate from Honda R&D, which is the research arm of Honda Motors. So we are basically focusing on the basic research, some things that, research that maybe doesn't go to products. So we look at fundamental questions, and at HRI, we always ask this question whenever we propose research. So every time I go and meet the bosses, they always ask this question. We have this A00, like what is the A00 of this project? So you develop the A00, you have the target, and then the next question would be, what is the value of this project? So you may spend like a month talking about your project, and they will reject that because they're not satisfied with the value. So every project at HRI should have a value. Like it should be like useful, and it's not just about the technology, but it's all about the impact, not just for the society, but maybe for your customers. And the bosses are very interested about that. So you may have, very good idea about AI, but if it doesn't satisfy the value that they're looking for, then maybe your project will not be approved. So then we were talking about values and stuff. So then we kind of focus on maybe the impact of technology to society and well-being. So that's why we were looking at how we develop machines that are actually beneficial to society. And we look at about, impact of polarization and the impact to social cohesion and how maybe social media is actually impacting this. And we said, okay, now we want to develop a technology that would actually strengthen social cohesion. It's something that really impacts society. So that's why I'm going to talk about this project in relation to this. And I think we kind of agree that we want to develop these machines for society. And you always have these questions when you develop this machine. They will ask this question like, okay, now what are the fundamental, say for example, pillars for these machines that you're developing? Because they always ask these questions. When we develop a robot, we have this robot downstairs we're showing. When we pitch the project of the robot, then people, in the higher echelons will say like, so you're just developing a robot. What's the robot for? So they ask these questions, and then we have to come back and say like, okay, so it's for society. And then they will ask questions like, then what are the fundamental pillars behind this development? So then we start looking at these pillars. We define together with our partners, like, what is this robot for? So we say, okay, this robot should, say, for example, shall affirm and not judge. And I think it was discussed in the previous speaker that you have these robots that are actually making children feel that they are in a safe space with the robot. So then we stick to this fundamental pillar when we develop applications for a project. So the second pillar is called robots or intelligent machines shall strengthen and not replace human experience. We're very much interested about human experience, right? Of course, we do not discount this experience with virtual world. It's amazing. But as a company, we are very much interested with the physical experience, to move from one place to the other, the experience. So that's why we want to develop robots that really bring people back and say like, okay, this is a physical experience that everyone should, have. Robots should not take away the experience from you. It should make you feel that you are part of the physical world. So the third pillar, this is about community. So we don't want to develop robots that's just benefiting individual. It's about a robot that actually helps relationships among people, building social connections, mediating relationships. So these are the fundamental pillars that we are actually thinking with our project. So now I'll talk about our project called Embodied AI for Cross-Cultural Mediation for Children. So we're actually developing this kind of robot that facilitates the interaction of children, right? So the idea is that, children, for example, from different countries, it's very difficult for them to see each other because, you have to travel. So we kind of think that maybe robots could actually make them understand and make them connect with each other through this kind of applications. It's pretty much like this, what do you call this? Like a Zoom in steroid, where you have actually, you introduce a social actor there, which is the robot. So you do face-to-face communication, but then you have the robot there. And the robot would try to help children to really open up. And the robot perhaps facilitates the understanding of the different culture by, making children talk about their experience, their physical experience and their experience in their local community, and help them understand this and perhaps accept this. So we built this system, and I think we started working with this when we were piloting the study with UNICEF together with Vicky, I think 2 years ago, and it took some time for us to develop the whole system. So right now we are pretty much like 80% of developing the whole prototype. And so what we actually are doing is we try to work with partners, for example, educators, and we try to come up together with them, like the content, like what are the topics to discuss? If it's about culture, then how do you talk about culture? How do you talk about topics, and how can a robot, do some topic springboard? And we get this advice from teachers and from experts. Then we talk with behavior specialists and trying to design robot behaviors and how to do this. Like, how can a robot mediate this, and what is the turn taking, and this equitable turn taking. How can a robot explain? And then we work with roboticists in order to automatically understand, so the robot would understand that it's time for it to explain, it's time for it to perform some turn taking. And then we program all of these, and again, working with experts to try to investigate the impact to children. And in the long term, we're very much interested of really looking whether there is an impact to bridging cultural gap. But so it's really a 5-year project, and we're still like in the 2nd year right now. So just to summarize those, I'll play this video.
Over the next 5 years, HRI is focusing on research in AI that is designed to proactively nurture positive relationships and social cohesion. Our first phase is aimed at supporting inclusive practices and an acceptance of diversity through an embodied AI that acts as an encouraging mediator. Children, and the adults they become, are the future of a diverse and cohesive society. At HRI, we're working with various partners and stakeholders to design an encouraging mediator that aims to support appropriate pro-social skills and ways of thinking that bridge cultural differences and support equity, diversity, and inclusion through an exchange of ideas, discussion, and shared experience with their peers in other countries. The encouraging mediator will adopt UNICEF's policy guidance on AI for children as an interactive, cross-cultural shared experience that creates an enabling environment for its participants. Diversity is about what makes groups different from one another. Community is created out of sharedness and not by sameness. Our encouraging mediator, equipped with human understanding, autonomous behaviour generation and creative learning modules, will facilitate and mediate interaction and communication with children from various institutions from all over the world to form a diverse and shared community through a series of activities that encourage self-expression, open discussion and an understanding of each other's cultures.
So we are starting the pilot studies, and hopefully, so right now we work with Australia, Japan, and of course Spain, and hopefully we'll be able to run several pilot studies in different parts of the world. And so so this is the interaction with the robot. We're developing the autonomous behavior of the robot to facilitate this interaction automatically without programming. And we are very grateful with our partner. Thank you very much.
And now you're going to get another robot friend assistant with Dr. Shibata, who's going to talk about some of his work with Paro.
Thank you. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Takanori. And so I'll talk about Paro. Do I have only 2 minutes?
No. He's going to wave it. There's 2 minutes left.
So some of you have already known about Paro, but it's a baby serial robot, but it's a medical device in the US, in Europe, in the UK, Australia, Hong Kong, and Singapore. And we're going to expand more, but not in Japan. So let me say about that. So Paro has been used from children to elderly people in various kinds of situations. And Paro is a psychophysiological biofeedback medical device. And now we are trying to incorporate Paro into the healthcare systems in various countries. Each country have different systems. So we have to introduce Paro in appropriate way with some clinical evidence and also economical benefit. And now we are cooperating with the UNICEF and also UNIOM in order to provide mental health service to the Ukrainian refugees in Poland. I will talk about it briefly. And also we are proposing Paro to be a companion for astronauts, especially in the long-term missions such as Moon, Mars and the Moon. So that's the image. We are having some experiments at the analog space stations around the, like in the US, Poland, and so on. So when I started the research and the development of Paro, I learned a lot about animal therapy. So animals are very good. So there are 3 kinds of benefit: psychological merit, physiological merit, and the social. But in animals, even the animals are very good. There are some problems, difficulties of using or owning animals. Some people have allergy, some people have bites and scratches. And also there is a potential of infection from animal to human beings. And there are some apartments which are not allow us to have animals. And also at hospitals, nursing homes, and some other facilities, it's very difficult to keep or manage animals there. Some people, some places may accept visitations, but it's really hard. And especially at the ICU or isolated wards, they are very strict in the infection control. So, but we are allowed to use Paro there. Because, for example, this fire is made of silver ion that can kill bacteria and virus. They are very expensive, but it's for that such infection control. Can I just? Yeah. So let me show you the video. This video was created by the Prime Minister's Office of Japan. It shows the kind of functions of that. Power response part of the and the same as in the US and the skilled nursing facility. So she has dementia and behavioral issues. Part of Cognition and the this is the lungs and gas PTSD and dementia. They are trained and give people at the psychiatric hospital. So they have PTSD, stress, anxiety, and so on. Interaction with Paro improves their mood. I skipped many slides, but this is a kind of introduction of functions. Paro has many kinds of sensors, and also basically Paro is based on the embodied AI. So especially Paro has 2 kinds of learning functions. One is name, the other is behaviors. So if Paro has speech recognition. So in Europe, one Paro recognizes 5 languages: English, French, Italian, Dutch, and German. I don't understand that. So in some sense, Paro is intelligent. And now there are more than probably about 50 countries or even more that has been using Paro in the practical situations. So there are about 8,000 paros in the practical use. Japan is the most. So as for, there are some cultural differences. In Japan, half of the users are individuals who bought paro as pet or companion at home. Of course, some of them are used for the home care, like for elderly people who need care at home. But there are a lot of people who, like families, are using paro. And they use paro for a long time. So in our record, the longest one is since 2005. So even now they are using paro. And half of them are institutions. So they use paro for therapeutic purpose. And in Europe, Denmark was the first adopter. They had a national project to evaluate paro in dementia care from 2006 to 2008 for 2 years. And they found paro was very effective for elderly people with dementia. Then they started to use paro. But at the same time, in 2007, they had, in Denmark, they have a Danish Ethical Council. It's government level. And they had a long discussion about ethics. I mean, introduction of social robot to the society. And so majorly that was paro, but so it was more than half a year. And finally they accepted, they had 4 recommendations. So robots should be safe for the people, and privacy, security, they are very important. And in the case of the usage of robot for the people with dementia, deception is a kind of issue. But if robots are good for the people, even though it seems to be deception, but the introduction of paro as like a living animal or like a robot, they are still fine. So that's a result. Then they started to accept that. And in the UK, now they have a medical guideline, NICE guideline. They introduced paro in the NICE guideline as a non-pharmacological therapy for the people with dementia, and with high quality evidence. And this is only one non-pharmacological therapy which has high quality evidence. So as an NHS hospitals, if they have paro, if people with dementia have like behavioral issues and psychological symptoms, first they have to try paro as a first choice. And if paro doesn't work, they are allowed to use psychotropic medications. So avoiding the medications are very important. And in the US, paro is a biofeedback medical device in class 2 since 2009. And after accumulated the clinical evidence by randomized controlled trials, then since 2018, the Medicare and Medicaid, that's public medical insurance, and also private medical insurance accept reimbursement when paro is prescribed for biofeedback therapy. That's good. So basically, interaction with paro can improve quality of life, anxiety, pain, depression, sleep, like insomnia, stress, loneliness, pleasure, engagement, and so on. And also improve communication and sociability, reduce agitation, aggression, walking about, and also risk of falling. This is important. And also burden of care for caregivers or nursing staff, nurses. Then we can reduce a lot of medications. That's an image of the usage. And there are some like systematic review and meta-analysis. And this paper found 900 papers on paro of the clinical trial in dementia. There are 12 randomized controlled trials, and the result of the meta-analysis of them, paro improved the BPSD, sociability, and also reduced the medication. And yeah, so I'll skip some slides. So this is a prescription in the case of the depression, insomnia, cognitive communication deficit. So if the elderly person with dementia have the behavioral issues, like 20 minutes is one session, and twice a day, and also PRN. That means when the patient needs paro, they can use paro. This is for rehabilitation, fine motor skill and speech therapy, and some others. And paro has been used in acute care, and they found paro can improve agitation and pain of the elderly people with dementia and or delirium. Delirium is very difficult. There's no medications. at the University of Pennsylvania, they continue to use Palo in acute care. And we now started Harvard Medical School and collaboration with them. So as for the building in the middle, that's a headquarters of the New England Journal of Medicine. It has an impact factor about 170, 190, 180, very high, much higher than the nature or science. And Palo has been used in the pediatric ICU. That's UC San Francisco. And also Palo has been used for the training of the social skills of the children with developmental problems and disorders. I skip many slides. And Palo has been used for the kind of victims of the or evacuees of the earthquakes and also nuclear power plants problem explosion in Japan. Some are donated from the US. And even after 10 years later, still they are using Palo. Yeah. The Palo is one of the oldest stuff there. And this year we had a huge earthquake on January 1st. And we used Palo for the kind of evacuees from the North Peninsula in March. And also we are using Palo for Ukrainian refugees. Let me skip many slides. So this is a pediatric psychiatric hospital in Mars. So we had more. And so we are working with IOM, UN IOM. So they have 8 family support centers, and they have 8 Palos, and there are 2,000 Ukrainian refugees, and they are using Palo. Also, UNICEF have 7 student hubs in 7 cities in Poland, and they are using Palo. So as for the space mission, so there are some space robots. But I used to work for the AI lab MIT. It is Professor Roderick Brooks, and he created the insect robot and humanoid robot. And the insect, as you may know, insect robot became iRobot, and the humanoid robot is the receiving robot. And as for the insect robot, that was the kind of base of the Sojourner, which was the first rover on the moon, on the Mars. And at that time I was there, so we had this lot of discussion about Mars. So I thought I was already working on the animal type robot at that time, and so I thought I can send animal type robot as a companion for astronauts, and that was a kind of motivation for the application of the for the astronauts. I'll skip. Yeah, and I know. So I'll skip many slides. Yeah, we have been introducing Palo in many conferences. Yeah, we have some collaboration with JAXA. JAXA is the Japanese NASA, and also NASA. Skip slides. So this is the case in Utah, and it's a Biosphere 2 in Arizona. I'll skip this video. So that was Iman, who is a professor at the Vanderbilt University Medical Center. And this is important. There are a lot of medical doctors in the experiments. And they published, they had a presentation at the NASA's conference this year. And Iman was selected as real astronauts in April. So they are in Hawaii. So I cannot have explanation more, but maybe you can.
Yeah, so if you want to interact with some of our friend robots, we'll take a little 10-minute break. Be back here at, sorry, my computer has the time in America. 4:40. And then we're going to also move the room a little bit so we can have our panelists in the front. We're going to have your questions for them, also some further discussion on what all of this means for good, and then also some participation by you as the audience. We want you to tell us what you think is good. and then we'll have some conversations. So if you're feeling sleepy, now's the time to get coffee and get ready to be active, but also play with robots.
It's more.
You're midway.
And ethical AI, but also the intersection of gender and AI. For example, there was a presentation with gender regarding, for example, climate change, migration, and everything. It's not someone study. So now that AI is, growing exponentially, there's issues with algorithms, with discrimination, with everything. So we're not really studies with that, with taking women as a
There are 7 chairs.
just for example, they use ensure the impact would be on crash, So there was until last year, they measure the female body, like female type of body, So of course the images are very different, like here with the breast and everything. So you see the medicine research with the same stuff with the same.
Especially because it's using the data topic.
There's intersectionality, yes. There's some effect, of course, that's so that's why it's like, want to make it like round.
Oh, like that.
If I don't want to they put me the spotlight to speak, so I don't know what to.
Okay, here he's got it. You have a friend.
Because
I have a feeling Shibata-san is not gonna get that friend back at some point. Somebody might just disappear with the pink pearl.
I don't know. Well, yeah, I need
Look that way, Shibata-san.
Then at least I should get questions.
Yeah.
You're a beat Marl.
It's a white? Yeah.
International Space Station.
It's flying around.
So some strengths and bad mood. So they do something bad. Yeah, like children with body like this.
Yeah.
That's possible. Yeah. So we have to make file very robust.
Yeah, true. So nice that you have such a
It's like kind of like a little shrink. It's out. Yeah, 900.
It's moving.
Only in the image.
Wow.
on les intègre parce que c'est vraiment bien et puis on trouve un deal pour l'intégrer dans
Everybody wants to hold
I don't know. It made me happy. Yeah.
We need to
So in the case of the randomized trial, it takes about 5 to 7 years. To have maybe even longer from the preparation to that application of the paper.
Yeah, and then we can take photo there, so we have. We have like a lot of photos. Some time. So that we have a lot of videos.
Yeah, that's why now we can incorporate part of the medical system.
No, now you need to.
Non, mais oui, mais on fait un peu au cas par cas. Parce que ça dépend vraiment. Est-ce que c'est vraiment. Oui, qu'est-ce que c'est vraiment.
Can you make
C'est quelque chose qu'on veut pousser dans le vertical, c'est vraiment à part.
So we the sound seems
When is the end?
So
what time are they closing down?
Yeah, they close in the late.
Et voilà pour adapter ça.
You can have like a poster for everybody.
No, you have I see.
Yeah.
Have a picture with
Yeah.
so
I have to join. Yeah.
Wait, what with close eyes? I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Maybe let's get.
It's your turn.
My turn to what?
Because it doesn't want to be
He doesn't like to be alone.
alone. Yeah.
How you're stuck with it.
Well, not a bad place to see. Yeah.
Yes, of course. Everybody was seduced by Pat. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2.
Oh, he's trying to crawl.
Yeah, buddy.
1, 2. Oh, I love it. I love it. Look, I took many. Like but why is it so dark?
It's just because the brightness is.
Okay. Okay, got it. Yes, yeah, you see. Sorry.
No,
you want
just
to- I. You see that?
It's like a little baby. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is good.
Oh.
That one is nice. Thank you.
Now is your turn.
Yeah.
Oh, but it was a baby.
But I love the use of body for the taking care of the other thing.
I really liked to hear your presentation about the what was
Picture
your
with
robot's name?
video, so-
Oh, we have downstairs.
Two babies.
We go downstairs.
Okay, yeah, I'll go visit with him.
How much is this?
2,500.
And you can have the SDK.
Yeah.
Wow.
We have to discuss.
Yes, maybe we get a list. Yeah, before we build our own, we already saw this.
1, 2, 3.
Thank you.
My mom
Ready? Yes.
I bought her a Gmail.
Okay, let's see if I can hold Buddy.
After this presentation, we go downstairs to check the robots.
Okay. Surrounded.
Come on.
Yes, I love it. I took care of all. Yes. Thank
Sure. Yeah, let's take one here and then we're because we might lose the people in the meantime. We're starting again like now. Do you, like, if you need to go to the restroom or she's getting. Vicky was getting. So just feel free to pop in.
Cooler in the hallway.
Vicky's bringing water.
Ah, okay.
She's bringing a bottle.
Yeah, and I asked the person here to bring more. I was like, who do we get?
Yeah.
That's why. Here, probably went for water.
Just gotta tap into the main line.
Somebody, you want me to put up the panel?
Sure.
Ah, sorry.
Open to work with other robots.
So they can get started.
Yeah, we're very open.
We're in Japan.
Do you want me to, like,
We were there end of last year.
yeah, it's passed, and then 10 minutes for audience questions.
Shareholder from Japan. Oh. We have Sega Sami. Sega Sami. Yes.
You guys are doing a great job keeping this thing running. I'm impressed.
I'm gonna go yell inside.
Hi. But if you want to buy more, the price will. For 10 robots, I can do.
Yes, yeah.
Really?
Like how big the.
Where did the father I'm sitting on the edge of the ship.
Yes, yes, yeah. Funded the company.
Yes, but yeah, I started to move. I always. I really love it.
Yeah, but that's fine. Yeah, but it's available only.
Yeah. Sorry, how many minutes?
Yes, so look how much.
Yeah, that's.
Okay, so we'll start getting back, and maybe if we could take the panelists and invite you to join
He's getting more water.
You will need those
Chief adjusts. Okay, I just. Do it together. Yeah.
I'm sorry to find.
No, we're not. We just have an extra chair. So, no, 1, 2, 3, 4, Randy. That's 6. Randy. Randy. What do you have? I'm kidding. And then.
The teacher. They have big teacher energy.
I do that as well in my.
I think this one is.
So what we wanted to do now is actually have the panelists, now you know kind of where everybody comes from, what kind of work they do, you know, what kind of people they talk to in their daily work, what kind of questions they ask. And we wanted them to just take a little bit of time to reflect on a few of these questions that are kind of general to the topic. So what are maybe some things that are missing from the discussions of good that was in the paper short paper we provided them, what kind of other ethical concerns they have, who, I think some of them already mentioned this question of who should be involved, but also are there other kinds of, you know, existing work or ideas out there that they think would be important for us to think about as we're wondering how to answer the question many people pose, which is what does good mean anyway? How do we think about designing robots for good? So anyone, I can either start you from there, or does anybody feel excited to start?
And if I may add, before we start, also, one of the questions is there anything you think should be removed from the list? Is there anything you think is inappropriate?
I think Friederike is always the brave soul.
I'm just gonna try. So what I think is important, what I also raised in my talk, is that we have to integrate philosophers, ethicists from the start. I mean, we're talking about ethical guidelines, but in the lineup of the authors, all very eminent scholars in robotics or social robotics, but we need to actually get people from philosophy integrated and from other social sciences as well. So really, if we take this seriously, if you write another extended paper, get these people on board, maybe thinking along. And what I noticed, I'm just from Germany, and in the German scheme, you can always notice we have to have this LC package, work package in the project. So there has to be, or even in the Perseo project that I featured in the talk, there has to be a quota lawyer, a quota ethicist, philosopher, or I'm usually the quota psychologist on board. And what I find important is that not to have these people, just to have them on board, so you can check that off your list, but really to take seriously what we actually say and do. So the empirical data as well. If you have empirical data, for instance, there's the naval robot down there, a very cute one with the head. I was involved in building this. We also found some not so great data saying like, oh, there are problems with that robot too. Integrate these findings into the development of the robot, feedback that information from basic research into the development of the robot and take it seriously. So sometimes I'm missing that. So I would say, bring all these people on board, but also listen, not just have them on your list of top co-authors from ethics, from philosophy and psychology. And so that's something that I would value a lot. And I also think what is important is what I talked about, the very mixed feelings, and they shown through the other presentations as well, very ambivalent feelings people might have. We have to take that serious as well and have to work with this, exactly with those people who really feel uncomfortable or thinking of deception. If we have these robots around in elderly care centers for long term, and we learned from Shibata Sensei that they have been around for 20 years almost in the care center. What if you take that robot away? Or Selma, you yourself did research on people, they took the robot away from them, and then the people feel desolate. So with all these dilemmas that are introduced, once you introduce the robots, have them there and take them away again. Or these forms of attachment that could play a role. You might really create a strong bond with that robot. How to go about that? So I'm thinking we have to look at these ethical dilemmas more seriously, and not just because we have to. And I also think when we talk about what is good, Vicky, you said it in your introductory remarks already. What is it actually? As a psychologist, I would ask myself the same question. I think the paper didn't answer that for me. And I think we would have, as a community, going beyond social roboticists or AI researchers, we have to come up with a benchmark of actually saying, okay, this benchmark or these metrics we can use, and maybe metrics that we can use across laboratories, across university research groups, to have some sort of overarching evaluation system, let's say, to make a statement about, okay, this has been good and bad. And coming back to my own perspective as this nitty-gritty lab nerd interested in cause and effect relationships, we sometimes just think about the specific cause and effect relation between variable A and B, robot behavior, and then perceived mind or perceived comfort, quality of life, or whatnot. And we don't always think of, oh, what's the good for the societies at large? For basic research, sometimes this is not of interest at all. We are just interested in understanding, how does this work? How does the manipulation of some sort of robot behavior or appearance or whatever feature play out in the perception of the human user or stakeholder or whoever you study. And I think we have to extend that view to, a more macro level. And these are the points that got me thinking. So thank you very much for inspiring this thinking and reflection process. And with this, I'm going to shut up.
I can jump in.
Sure.
So one dimension that I felt not missing, but implicit in the questions is time. So one thing that made me think is there are some goods that might arrive.
Oh,
okay, sorry.
Excuse me.
Yes, might arrive, but they are far, far ahead in the future. And this somehow needs to be taken into account, because also the bad is something that might arrive far, far in the future. And therefore, not contextualizing in time the good and bad might risk also to prompt measures, even legislation or legislative measures, or even fear that is not properly sized. So this doesn't mean that if something bad might happen in the far future, we don't have to care about it, but it's correct. It needs to be put in perspective. And this, I think, is a lot that caused the problems in communication and also in how the AI evolution and robotics evolution has been perceived by the overall community. So there is this idea of the time of good and bad happening, and there is also maybe a timing of application of these rules, because at the very beginning of the research, it is all right to have already in mind what will be the potential consequences of the task of what we are doing. But on the other hand, maybe you don't know the phenomenon yet. You know, you need to be a little more free to explore, to try. Of course, once this hits the impact and the society, it's moving and approaching the market, so it's probably already too late to discuss that. But at the very beginning, the developer, the experimenter, needs to have a kind of freedom that is larger than the one that we will need to follow to the next step. So I think that the way both the questions live in time and how we have to compute or quantify good and bad needs also to take the temporal dimension into the equation.
Are there particular things that, as you're saying about these misperceptions that I think, Friederike also pointed to, that have this time dimension? Are there particular things that come to mind in relation to robots that maybe we shouldn't worry about right now, like dealing with right now vis-a-vis the time component, versus something maybe that we should actually be much more worried about?
Well, in my direct experience, I spoke a lot in public talking about robotics. And the first question that most people ask me is, when in the next 3 years, 5 years, they will enter our home, or when they will take our jobs. So it was just, for sure, it would have happened. It was a matter of when, and the time frame was like really, it's tomorrow or maybe the day after. And this, I think, is the outcome of. So I think that's a problem that we need to discuss, and we need to discuss not only within the boundaries of robotics, but it is a societal discussion. It's about what these tools, these AI tools, robotics tools that are already available, that are already used by people, can reshape in the next future our activities. This is a discussion that probably should have started even earlier. But instead, a discussion about, I don't know, giving rights to robots when they will become part of our society and as a citizen. This is a discussion that will start now, but it's not something that it's thinking of robots as cognitive robots, really. The one that TV instructed us to believe we will have. Well, it is not the time yet to really discuss that for tomorrow. Yeah, but probably, for example, some people probably are aware of the upcoming regulatory frameworks, that, at least in Europe, but also in the States and other countries around the world. So based on fundamental rights. So there are fundamental rights. So probably it's not like when robots will replace a certain group of people, but I mean, in terms of their job, but how we protect human rights while we design, I mean, so now we design robots that might enter homes in 10 years or 20 years, right? So, and this, I think, is at least at the policy level, is a very vivid discussion at the moment with the AI Act, etc. Right? So I don't know if you work with this kind of. I think Ginevra, you saw already the framework from the Altai and the human rights. So I mean, these kind of things are they already incorporated in your work?
Yeah, maybe I can jump in.
Yeah.
And definitely. So I think this it's becoming clearer and clearer that we can't let the regulation to follow technology development, but we need to take a proactive approach and take a human right-centered approach to the design and the development of technology. That's the way forward. And even if we don't have the technology at the level yet to be ready to be deployed.
Yeah, and probably with, sorry.
Yes.
With Paro, I mean, you already mentioned some regulations in terms of healthcare. So how did you deal with this kind of regulatory frameworks that there are in different?
Yes.
Also, this is like very diverse, I suppose.
It's very complex. But for example, in the world, there's ISO 13485. It's a regulation for medical device. And we have to comply the regulation in order to introduce the technologies as a medical device. I mean, of course, you have to get some kind of certification or clearance. So there are many kinds of regulations already in the case of the medical device. Yeah. So of course, some of the technologies, I mean, social robots, if they want to become the medical device, they have to comply with such existing standards. Yeah. And also in the case of the FDA, for example, so they have their own regulation. So they have quality systems regulations for medical devices. But once we introduce some device as medical device, so they have inspection every 3 years. So they come to Japan, to our factory, and investigate everything for 4 days every 3 years. It's very stressful, and we have to pay a kind of registration fee every year. So it's very expensive too. Yeah.
But this is from the government, or it is a third part, like IEEE?
So there's a company. It's called the Intelligent System Corporation, and that produce Paro and sell Paro. Yeah. So this company have to take care of such kind of regulation issues. So of course, creating some standards is very good. But if you have too many regulations, that will cause a lot of problems for the companies. Yeah, because we have to, the companies have to comply with such kind of regulations, standards. Yeah. And as for the kind of ethics or kind of acceptance of technologies, so this some of you may know. So recently, the Nature have one article. So could you show the Nature one? So if you Google Nature Paro robot, you can find it very easily.
It's coming.
It's not only for Paro, but it is an argument.
This one, right?
Yeah. So robots, the solution to the crisis older person care. So this is a case of the elderly kind of applications. But could you scroll
down to see below?
So first, the nice picture of Paro, but the article is not very positive, not always positive to Paro.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some kind of.
But they examined only Paro or different?
There are some other robots.
Okay.
So if you could just scroll. There is a second picture, and maybe you can. My reading is slow, but you may be quick. So there are more pictures, but they just scroll up, down.
Back up.
Down.
Sorry,
Go down. I don't know. Up there.
I can't see it very well, so.
There are some more pictures, so you can understand what they are dealing with. There are some good stories, but
Yeah.
like that, there are some other robots, so they discuss. So when you have time, yeah, I think it's very nice to read this article.
Okay.
Yeah. Of course, this is not limited, but there are similar articles recently. But this is just the last month in April. So this kind of topic is still kind of very hot topic in the kind of among the researchers, I think. So this meeting is very important.
Of course.
Rolf, do you have any thoughts on the regulatory environment, given that you also sell a sort of a commercial robot? And like, is this considered a medical device or just a consumer electronic?
Medical device. We start by experimentation with senior to understand how they can interact with the robot, what we can offer, and it's very interesting to see the feedback from seniors, because many people think that seniors don't like technology. But when they see bodies, they don't see technology, they see just a companion, a character. So this is why they adopt body very easily. Because it's very important for us to have a companion. This is the main thing for them. They just want not to be alone. And it's funny because our vision is the key for mass adoption of robots, is to create empathic and emotional link between people and robots. And it's why we have this kind of emotion with the robot. And as I said during my presentation, some people said, "Oh, it's not good to say that your robot can have an emotion, real emotion." But people who said that are not the people who live with the robots. So it's always the same thing. Elderly are not crazy. They understand that it's not a human, it's not a pet, but it's a companion. And for them, it's okay, no problem. And often it's more the children, they said, "No, it's not good for my grandmother." But the user needs that. But if you ask them, "Do you need some services like alert if you have a problem or a cognitive simulation or this kind of thing?" No, I don't need anything. I'm autonomous. And the children said, "No, you have 3 persons every day. They come to help you." But for them, no. They don't need anything. They just need compassion. So today we work on that, and after we will have to work on the medical device agreement, or I don't know what exactly, just to have some financement from in France, but I think it's the same thing in other countries. But other robots is not so expensive. People can already buy this robot at this price, €2,000. So,
and it's just like
affordable.
And it's just like a consumer It's just like a consumer electronic. It's not like so there's not like as many regulations.
Like consumer electronic. So we don't have any maintenance or something like that. But we talk about robots for many years, and when I'm a robotics and AI engineer, and when I was young, I was sure that in few years after we will live with robots everywhere. But today it's not that. But it's just the beginning. So for the first question, I think it's the right point in time to start talking about regulation, because we will have more and more robots to share our daily life, and we will have to deal with the fact that the interaction must be safe and respectful. The robots will collect many personal data also to be able to react the better way with the people. So they have to collect some data. They will also they will be able to take some decision with significant consequences for the life of the people. So it's also important to have regulation or ethics guideline about that. And one more thing is when fragile people will live with robots for a very long time, we don't know exactly what could be the impact of maybe we develop this robot, we create some joke, we create some reaction for this robot, but maybe this kind of reaction could manipulate people. maybe when they have to vote for Trump or for Biden, but maybe if they heard many jokes, I don't know which one, but you know, after many years or months using Buddy, maybe it could influence the vote or the thing like that. So it's important to think about that before. It's why we work on the white paper on ethics of social robotics.
Yeah, probably first here and then,
Yeah, I have a question for Buddy. So when you bring the robot to a specific setting, like for example, children or elderly, is the same robot or program, or do you like, how can I say it? If it's for children, it comes from you fill the robot with that specific setting that it will be for autism children or everything. I don't know if it's different because each audience have different needs. So I don't know if it's the same robot and it learns how to interact with what they have in front. I don't know if I explain myself.
So this is the same robots, same hardware, and Buddy have two modes. The first thing is the companion mode. So you will react like a pet, something like that. You will caress the robot and you will be happy. So it's the same thing for senior and for children with autism, as an example. And it's the key for the adoption of the robot, because you create the link with this kind of thing. And after, we'll have some specific applications, or for children or for senior, and it's also an open platform. So we can integrate other applications from everyone who wants to create or adapt their Android, because it's Android application on this robot. And you can launch this application by voice, but the robot is able also to launch itself application in function of the time, or maybe if he detects the grandmother, he knows that you have to launch the Mammy Care application or something like that.
Yeah. Can we just give the opportunity for all the speakers to speak first, and then we come back to you, probably with the Honda robot, the Haru robot, because you work a lot with cross-cultural settings. So what is, how do you combine these findings with the mitigation of bias, cultural biases? Because we know that data, I mean, in many cases, we have biases in data just because the training data are from a specific population, but you implement the robot in different populations, children from Africa or from Australia, etc. So how do you handle this data, and how this inform the behavior of the robot?
Well, so I think we've just started. We haven't really done a lot in that case, but yeah, we are very much interested of like really looking at the different cultures and different demographics when designing robot behaviors. And I must admit that we are still at the onset of deploying the robot. So that's why we're very much interested in really running pilot studies at different places, right? Because that's the part where we're going to learn. And developing robot behaviors, for example, for specific demographics, it's not an easy task, right? Because I like, we talk about robots replacing people, and I don't think we have the technology even in the next 15 years. So, so I think that for now, what we're very much interested in is pretty much looking at these different demographics and deploy different applications for different demographics. And I think with one of our studies, like for example, in Uganda and in Japan, their needs for robot applications are very different, right? So we had these studies where for Ugandan children, it's more about robots are for security purposes, but for the Japanese children, it's more about the mental impact of robots to children. So there's no such thing as like one size fits all. And I think that in the absence of really this autonomous behavior generation, I think we should start with these pilot studies and do things from scratch where we program the robot that fits to that particular culture or demographics.
And I have then a question to kind of suck rope David in, but it's also for everybody, which is, I think one of the things about robots is we kind of interact with them at the surface interface level, although there's so much going on inside and, you know, connections to the cloud and all other kinds of stuff. So when you think about the AI inside, or you know, those other components, what are maybe some concerns that come to mind that go beyond, you know, the interface that I think people most commonly respond to, and what should we do to perhaps also engage people and, like Federica was saying, maybe provide some more transparency as to like what else is going on with the robot other than just what we seem to see and then interpret in our very kind of human-like social ways.
That's a great question. I mean, one thought, which isn't really answering the question, but you know, in like the US and other countries as well, when you buy some food, there's like a nutrition label on it, and it's organized in this very specific way. And the nutrition label doesn't tell me whether it's a good food for me to eat or a bad food. It just like lays out the facts in the way that I can understand. And there's a paper that I like a lot. It's by Timnit Gebru and some other folks. It's called data sheets for data sets, is what it's called. And the idea is that when you collect a data set, there's going to be all kinds of, you have to make all these design decisions. It's going to be biased no matter how careful you are. So at least what we should be is transparent about the way in which this data set was collected. And so you can imagine, like I can imagine you could take your 10 questions here and create a little nutrition label that at next year's AI for Good Summit, everybody has to have on their booth.
For their robot, there,
Exactly.
great idea.
And that could, I mean, you have to do it at some level of abstraction so it doesn't become a giant like 1,000-page technical manual or something, but it could have other fields like, is the processing done locally? Is it sent to some cloud? Where is this cloud sent to? Yeah, and just sort of very high level details, high level things like that.
Great, I love that.
Can I add to that?
Quickly, and then
So I think that maybe what is needed is a critical look at robot morphology and seeing that as an infrastructure that brings people together in different ways and also leaves people out and has certain values attached to it, so kind of opening it up. And I think with that, I think there's a creative potential there. If you open it up and look at it as infrastructure, you might arrive at different forms of what robots are. Because what I picked up in these presentations is that the robot is taken for granted as is. And to question that, I think is maybe a way forward. Just wanted to add that reflection there.
Yeah.
Yes. So as for the regulations again, so when we look at the medical devices, so for example, this is connected to the internet and using the camera, for example, and there are a lot of regulations for the medical devices in this kind of field. So if you consider about some kind of standard or regulations for social robot, I think you can learn from the medical device. Yeah, they're very strict. So yeah.
So it makes sense to have regulation for social devices then?
Yeah. So I don't know how we can define the social robot. Yeah.
Would you like to go? Well, yes. I have another question. So I am in the field of gender and social development, and I was very interested in your presentation as well in the use of AI and technology for women that works for women, specific women's needs. So I would like to know, how do you work with intersectionality in terms of not like a women can have different layers of discrimination, you know, color, nationality, etc., the disabilities. So how your technology, or I don't remember the name, sorry, can work for like a specific setting of, you know, like women, considering all layers of intersectionality. I don't know how to express myself.
Yes, so in our work on social robots for perinatal device mainly We conducted one study. It was a study where we interviewed the gender scholars, gender study scholars, as one of our stakeholders, because we wanted to find out how we could take a gender sensitive approach to the design of the robots in this context. The outcome was that we really need to move towards an intersectional approach to the design of these robots. And one aspect that the gender scholar pointed out was the fact that the issue of self-similarity between the patient and the robot might be crucial in the design. So thinking that patients might want to interact with a robot that looks like them. And if we have a robot, for example, the Furhat robot that we use, where we can actually change the appearance of the robot, then an important question that I actually wanted to bring up is it always good or even ethical to let users to decide how this robot should look like? So is this kind of personalization good? Is it ethical? Because if we think about a human context, gender or ethnicity concordant care requests are not acceptable. So are we seeing some tensions here that we should probably take into account? And so more broadly, the question is, should we always let users decide? And maybe that's something that I think we could consider in the paper.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
Thanks. Sorry, I'm very glad to hear from your talks the importance of including philosophers in this. I think, well, I'm a philosopher of technology and ethicist. Maybe I'm the only one, I don't know.
Future co-author, you know.
It's nice to finally be able to get a job for the study that you've done, so some people would say. But I think it's very interesting because you're addressing things such as what is the epistemology of the word good? And I think everyone's talking about good and ethical, and no one's talking about principles or ethical issues. So I also feel like there's a bit of sometimes a disconnect between the people that are developing these type of technologies and talk about ethics and ethicists, for example, or indeed philosophers. So I'm glad that you recognize the importance of that, and I hope obviously you'll be doing it more as much as you can. So one of the issues that I encounter mostly in this is one that I haven't heard much yet either, is this issue of conceptual borrowing in research when it comes to AI or robotics. So we borrow from studies on consciousness or human behavior to explain machines, and we borrow concepts from machines to explain humans. Well, obviously they're not the same, right? We're saying the computer is thinking, while it's not thinking, right? It's calculating or something like that. So this misperception, and I think it was also addressed the misperception of robots and things like that, for me leads to a very big issue of AI anthropomorphism. And I'm very curious because, I mean, so far I haven't been able to find any argument that would justify robots to have an ontological understanding of the world, let's say, so to justify anthropomorphizing machines. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the issue of anthropomorphism of robots specifically? I think that's and is there an urgency to tackle it, and how would you suggest we do so?
I think the community has worked a little bit on anthropomorphism. We have some scholars here that have thought, I don't know, probably Federica or, I mean,
and just FYI, after this one, we're going to do a little bit of audience participation. So, yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, it's good. It's just, we could also have another workshop on that also.
Yeah,
You actually raised a very important point. So when I hit the community of social roboticists like 15 years ago, basically then we were also claiming robots are coming. Still here. So I at least have a little bit of history. But then the notion of anthropomorphism was just linked to, oh, it looks human-like, and the appearance was measured. So in terms of the theoretical foundation of that construct, some work came from psychology later to really disentangle, okay, what are the determinants and consequences of that anthropomorphism, and what does it actually lead to? It's not about, is it a cognitive error that we do that, or is it right or wrong to see animacy in the clouds or in technology or in whatnot, but really as a theoretical construct to kind of start theorizing about it. Just like I said about the transparency, we have to be clear about what are we actually talking about, or like what is good, like finding a good theory, finding good measurements. And yeah, there has been, I can calm you down, quite some work on trying to understand this and seeing where this goes and how this impacts perceptions of technology. And again, not to judge people who, I mean, there's even a personality disposition to see life-likeness, animacy, human-likeness, anthropomorphism in robots and other things. And we always used it as a control variable, basically to check like, okay, there are these people high versus low on that scale. So maybe they react differently to the robot when you put them in front of the robot. So I think it's still a very relevant question, but has been tackled by quite some researchers actually, yes, for many, many years. So I myself have been doing that, but I not that I lost interest, but it's it's not so much of the current concern actually.
Yeah, sure. And then, and from the robotic side, so why taking the inspiration from human cognition? So why taking that? Well, it's under discussion that as well in the robotic community, whether the reference should be the human intelligence, because of course, especially if you think of interaction, we see that animal intelligence is of course another very clever approach, and also totally different inspiration can be relevant. On the other hand, there are certain capacities and skills that have been so far mastered only by humans. And so for those of us who are imagining or trying to put at least a simplified version of these capabilities onto our machines, then human is the benchmark. Of course, this brings also, let's say, controversial discussion, because if you take, for instance, human as example, you know that humans do not born fully mature. So you have to take into account the development. And so there is developmental robotics exactly because of that, because you think, okay, I need to start. But if you accept this very strongly, then you would expect that a robot, before being deployed, needs to interact with you and the world for 18 years to become fully mature, which is a problem, of course. So it's not a unique solution, but for those of us who really take humans as benchmark, human cognition, this is like an important inspiration. So because humans demonstrate the ability to develop certain abilities that at the moment no other machine can show. This brings, however, the problem of how we narrate our effort in trying to imitate the human, because on that I'm with you, and that was I was raising. So when I'm talking about robot thinking or understanding or predicting, I'm of course borrowing a term that has a much deeper meaning than the one I'm at the moment using myself.
But of course, very quickly, just a joke about this. I mean, we don't tell submarines swim, right? Yeah.
And I just had a second thought that resonated with this experimental psychology side of me, because I mean, for me, robots came very handy when I started researching social robotics, because you can easily and nicely manipulate certain aspects of the robotic behavior, and the robot will hopefully always do it the same way. Yeah. If you have your human confederate trying to kind of give the same speech all over the place, it just won't happen. So you can always see like, okay, if the robust robotic behavior occurs over an experimental trial, always in this solid way again, you see how it impacts your outcome variables. So I use it not as a companion, but as really as a tool to exemplify certain psychological mechanisms. And for that, I think it's really has been very inspiring and helpful.
So we're going to transition, but I just want to stick one more thing in there, which there are ways in which the kind of inspiring people to anthropomorphize the robot actually link to psychological mechanisms that then bring out about the effect that you want to see. So with Paro, there was research many, many years ago, which is really useful, which is saying like, you have to introduce Paro in a certain way for the robot to actually be effective. You can't just shove it at people and leave. And so, you know, I think some of that aspect is really that the the anthropomorphization that people, the ideas that people bring into the interaction are the things that actually make the robots work. It's not the robots just on their own. And so I think that's the other thing that people are actually studying and trying to figure out, but which also brings up, you know, studying them with the ethical questions in mind of, you know, making the connection and then being attached to it, as Rodolphe was saying, or, you know, maybe having misconceptions because of the metaphor in some sense that's being used, you know, for the people to interpret the robot. So it's definitely an ongoing discussion.
Yeah, sure.
So in Denmark, so PARO was introduced in 2009 at the time. So in order to use PARO appropriately, we needed to organize one-day seminar for the therapist or caregivers. And after the training, so they get certificate or a license. And once such people who have the license are working some facilities, the local government provide PARO. So they are public health service system. So PARO is free for the elderly facilities, but the PARO should be used by the licensed person. Yeah. So that means they have to understand what is PARO, what is the role of PARO, goal of PARO, and what is the expected effect, something like that. So they have to understand before using PARO. So such kind of training or understanding is really important for robots to be used appropriately. So just putting PARO in front of the elderly person with dementia doesn't work well.
Yeah.